Okay, today's daf is Kuf Aleph in Masechet Pesahim. We are through the Chagim, so now hopefully we'll be having regular shiurim. And today we're going to begin on Kuf Amud Bet, 3 lines up from the bottom, the last word on the line, Otam. And this parak deals mainly with Kiddush, Havdalah, the Seder of Pesach, things that are a little bit closer to home than the Korbanot that we've been talking about up till now. So, Otam b'nei Adam, shekiddishu bebet HaKnesset. There is a very old custom, it's still practiced in many synagogues today, of making Kiddush on Friday night in the synagogue. Many synagogues, they have that. Mostly not Sephardic synagogues. Sfaradim, they don't do. Nowadays, mostly it's Ashkenazic synagogues. But it's a very common practice, and this practice existed in the times of the Talmud as well. So he says, Otam b'nei Adam shekiddishu bebet HaKnesset. Those people who made Kiddush in the synagogue. Amar Rav says, Yedei yain lo yatz'u. They didn't fulfill the mitzvah to drink wine. Okay, which means to say, if they're going to go home, Rashi says, if they're going to go home after the Kiddush and have dinner, and they want to drink more wine, they have to say Borei Priya Gefen again. However, Yedei Kiddush Yatz'u. They don't have to say Kiddush again, just Borei Priya Gefen.
What about the family?
So that's a separate, we'll see that's going to come up. Okay, but let's just for this guy, one guy, so he doesn't have to say Kiddush again, but if he wants to drink wine at home, when he gets home, he has to say Borei Priya Gefen. Because he didn't drink any wine. He just heard the Kiddush of the Chazan. U'Shmuel amar af yedei Kiddush lo yatzau. According to Shmuel, even Kiddush he didn't fulfill. And that's the halacha. We don't say that you can fulfill the mitzvah, you have to do it at home. Okay, so now you'll notice that on the page of Talmud now, there's Rashi on top and Rashbam under it. And the Rashi on the last parak of Masechet Pesahim is curtailed. It's very short. And Rashbam is long. He's not as long as Tosafot. He's almost like an expanded Rashi. So you have Rashi. Rashi is always on the inside margin.
Oh, okay.
So this is Rashi.
Yeah.
This is Rashbam. Okay, so he was a student of Rashi, of course, and then on the other side is Tosafot. So now Rashi is very short, and Rashbam takes up most of the page.
Wow.
Okay, I believe the reason is because the Perushim of Rashi were lost on this parak, and he didn't finish writing out he didn't replace the entire thing. So Rashbam came along and filled in a lot of detail. It gives a lot more. It's sort of in between Rashi and Tosafot in terms of it's longer, but it's not as long and involved. It's almost like a longer version of Rashi. So that's why you have this new commentary, Rashbam, on the side. So now we turn to Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph and Ela L'Rav. So the Gemara asks the question, Lama le kadushe bevete? So according to Rav, that really when you go to synagogue and you hear the Kiddush, you fulfill the mitzvah. So why do most people make Kiddush at home? So the Gemara answers your question. Because what about his family? Children, members of his household, he has to say Kiddush for them. And then what the opposite question on Shmuel? Ushmuel, lama li lekadushe bebek kinishta. So according to Shmuel, that you don't fulfill anything. So why do you have to say the Kiddush in the Bet Knesset? What's the purpose? So he answers, La'apukei orahim yedei chovatan da'achlu v'shatu v'ganu bebet kinishta. Because in those days, guests who came for Shabbat, they stayed in the synagogue, and they ate in the synagogue, and they drank in the synagogue. In other words, they were having their meal in the Bet Knesset. So they would say Kiddush for the people who were eating there. Because it was common that people would stay in the synagogue, guests, like an inn. Travelers, they wouldn't stay in your house, they would stay in the synagogue. So that's why they would say the Kiddush. But really, if you have a home in the neighborhood, you don't fulfill the mitzvah.
Yeah, but the Sfarad, they don't make Kiddush.
No, they don't do that. They don't do it.
Ashkenaz, they do the Kiddush.
Most, yeah. It's a machloket. The whole discussion is, the whole question is, according to Shmuel, what's the whole reason why they did Kiddush in the Bet Knesset? It's in order to take care of the people who stayed in the Bet Knesset. We don't have that today. People don't sleep in the Beit Knesset and eat Shabbat meals and all that. So why would you have Kiddush today? So many people argue, well, that custom was for those times because they had people staying in the Beit Knesset. We don't have that. So they eliminated it. And some people say once it's a tradition, you have to keep it, right? So that's the argument. Okay, now, and Shmuel follows his own reasoning. That Shmuel articulated the principle. He held that in Kiddush, ela b'makom seudah. That's the halacha. You can only have Kiddush if you eat something. You can't say Kiddush and have nothing. That's why even in a synagogue where, let's say, they do Kiddush in the morning of Shabbat, they always put food.
They put food.
There has to be mizonot or something.
Ashkenaz, they put all the time. Go on Shomer.
Right, in the morning,
they put the Kiddush and the food.
If they're going to have wine, there has to be some cake or something, right? So Shmuel says, "En Kiddush ela b'makom seudah." You have to have a meal. So therefore, if you come to the synagogue and you hear the Kiddush in the Beit Knesset, you're not having a meal there. So you don't fulfill the mitzvah. The people who are staying in the Beit Knesset, they fulfill the mitzvah because they're eating there. You see?
But seudah is contain cookies?
Really, it should be bread or something, but they use mizonot. It's like, b'diavad, you could use mizonot. So now, savur mina, they understood this to mean, that means only mibayit labayit, meaning to say, if you make Kiddush in one building, like I can't make Kiddush in Magen David, and then go home and have and eat at home. That's not bimkom seudah, right? That's not bimkom seudah. It's not the same place. But mimakom lemakom behad beta, from one place to another, I can make Kiddush in there and eat out here. I can make Kiddush, Rashi says, upstairs, let's say, and eat downstairs. Mibayit la'aliyah, because it's all one place. But if I make Kiddush in one building, I can't go to another building to have my meal. It has to be in the same place. That's why Shmuel says that the Kiddush that they do in the Beit Knesset, it can't count for you. You're eating dinner at home, you're not eating dinner here.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Now, Amar lehu Rav Anan bar Tahlifa. Rav Anan bar Tahlifa said to them, Zimnin sagi'in avakaim nakamei de Shmuel. Many times I was with Shmuel, v'nachit meigra la'ara, v'hadar mekadesh. And even though all we did was go from the roof to the downstairs, he made us do Kiddush again. So what does that mean? Not only from building to building, but even in the same building, if you make Kiddush on one level, you can't come down to another level to eat. You have to make Kiddush in the same area. The halacha actually is you have to be able to see the place. So for example, if you make Kiddush in here and you're going to eat out here, that's okay because I can see through you could see from that room, through the window, you could see into here. But really you should be able to see the place you're going to eat when you make Kiddush. You don't have to be standing in the exact place at the table. But you have to be in the same area. So like some synagogues are more lenient and they'll have Kiddush in the sanctuary and then eat in the social hall, which is across the way. But it's close enough. They say, well, you don't have to go up and down one level, you're on the same level. So there's an argument about what exactly the parameters are. But the idea is you have to be close. You have to be adjacent. Rav Huna also agreed that you can't have Kiddush unless you're going to eat. The Rav Huna Kaddish v'takra leishraga, because once Rav Huna made Kiddush on Friday night and his candle went out. So now he can't eat, he can't see. So what's he going to do? He finished the Kiddush, the minute the Kiddush was over, boom, the candle went out. A wind came, the candle was out. So what does he do? He can't light the candle at Shabbat. Va'ilele Lemane lebeginane de rabba bere de havash raga. So he took his food to the room where Rabbah, his son, would sleep. Okay? That's beginane means the place where he would sleep. In other words, he went to another room, or as Rashi explains at the bottom, bet chupat pino. That's what the Rashbam says. He went to the chupat beno, the marital. His son had just gotten married, so they had a special area. When they would get married, they would have like a special area designated for the chatan and kala that they made beautiful the whole week. Right, so he went into that area, the celebrating area of the Chatan and Kala, where they had lots and lots of candles lit, and he ate, and he had to make kiddush again. V'kadish v'ta'imidi. He had to make kiddush again. Why did he have to make kiddush again? Alma kasavar in kiddush al bokom seuda. Because he said, I made kiddush in my area, and my candle went out. I didn't eat, so I had to go and take my food over to the other room where there were candles and make kiddush again. I couldn't rely on the original kiddush. I had to make kiddush all over again because it was because my original kiddush wasn't valid, because there was no makom seudah, there was no food together with the kiddush.
That's not the bracha.
Well, he didn't know. It was, when he said the bracha, there was a candle.
Yeah.
If he knew that he wasn't going to have food, he wouldn't be able to say kiddush. He didn't know. His candle went out after he said the kiddush. Oh. So when he went over to the other area where his son's room, where he had light, he was able to eat there. But he had to say kiddush again. So now another case. Even Rabbah agreed with this idea that you have to have food where you make kiddush. Amar Abaye, because Abaye said, he said, when I was in the house of the master, the master is Rabbah, when I was in his house, he would say to us at kiddush, ta'imu midi, eat something. Dilma ad azlitu leushpiza mitakru lechu sharaga velo mekadesh lechu bebet achila. Because maybe when you get home, the candle's going to be out already. And you won't have the opportunity to say kiddush because it will already be dark. And then what's going to happen? Then kiddush al makom seudah. And you're not going to fulfill kiddush with the kiddush that you had here because we didn't need anything. So in other words, they would come to his house, let's say at Friday night, to the Rav's house, to Rabbah's house, and he would make kiddush with them. And then they would go to the place that they were eating. So he would say to them, make sure to eat something here, because if you go home, they might not have kiddush over there. Because it might be dark, their light went out.
So how did people did it 3,000 years ago?
What do you mean?
When wasn't power, electricity?
No, they had candles on Friday nights. Okay. Candles. So that's what the Shabbat candles originally, that was what it was for.
For a long time?
They would make big candles for the nighttime, for the Friday night. So, but he said maybe, in other words, they said kiddush at his house. They heard the kiddush. He said, eat something. So you fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush. Because if you don't fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush, and you go home, and the light has gone out, you're not going to be able to fulfill kiddush there either. And then you have no kiddush. So what does that show you? He held that you have to eat to fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush. If you didn't eat, it's not enough. Aini, is that really true? Va'amar Abaye said, Kol mili demor hava avid kerav. That Abaye said that everything Rabbah did, he did according to Rav, except for three things. Devar mehanetlat, David kishmuel. That Rav and Shmuel would always argue, right? So Rabbah followed the positions of Rav on everything except three things. What were the three things? Matirin mibeged lebeged umadlikin mener lener v'alachal Rabbi Shimon. There were three things where Rabbah followed Shmuel instead of Rav. What were the three things? He permitted you to take tzitzit from one garment and put them on another garment. Rav says no. Shmuel said yes. Second thing, Rav said you can't light from one candle to another on the Chanukah candles. Let's say you had a very long wick on the candle that you didn't have to move it. You can't touch the other candle flame and light it like that. You're not allowed to take from one candle and give it to another candle on the Chanukiah. Shmuel said you can. And then Rav and Shmuel had an argument. Can you drag a heavy chair outside on Shabbat? Rav said you can't because maybe it's going to make a furrow in the ground. Shmuel said since that's not your intention, it's davar she'eino mitkaven, you're allowed to do it. So in these three cases, Rabbah went leniently. He followed Shmuel. Okay? Detanya says in the Braita, as we learned in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer Adam Mida Kisef Safsal b'Shabbat u'b'vad shel yitkaven lasot charetz. That Shmuel followed Rabbi Shimon, that you're allowed to drag a bed or a chair or a bench on Shabbat as long as you don't intend to make a hole. If it happens by accident, it's okay. You're not intending. So these three things are the only time Rabbah followed Shmuel. Why? And now here, Rav and Shmuel are arguing. Rav says you don't have to have kiddush b'mkom seudah, right? Because he says if you hear kiddush in the Beit Knesset, you fulfill the mitzvah, even though you didn't have food. Shmuel says you need that food, right? So why did Rabbah require them to have food? Rabbah should have followed Rav. He always follows Rav. Rav is the lenient one. He says you don't need that food. So the answer is Kechumre de Rav hava avid. Only the stringencies of Rav. However, Kekule de Rav lo hava avid. He didn't follow the leniencies of Rav. Meaning to say, here Rav is being lenient. Rav is saying you don't need to have food. He says I don't follow the leniencies of Rav, only the stringencies. So here Shmuel is more machmir. I'm going to follow Shmuel. And that you require food. Okay, so that's the halacha, and that is the halacha. You have to eat, but you have to eat in the place where you have kiddush. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Amar af yedayinam yatzu. Rabbi Yochanan is the most lenient of all. So far we heard Rav. Rav said you fulfill kiddush if you hear it in the Beit Knesset, but you don't fulfill the mitzvah of drinking wine. Meaning, if you go home and you want to drink wine, you have to say Borei Priya Gefen, but not the kiddush. Shmuel said you don't even fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush. You have to say the whole kiddush over again. Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm so lenient, not only did you fulfill the kiddush without food, you even fulfilled birkat hayayin. If you go home and you want to drink more wine, you don't have to say Borei Priya Gefen. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. How could it be? Right? So that's what he says. Vazda Rabbi Yochanan the Tameh. Rabbi Yochanan is consistent with something he said elsewhere. The Amar Rabbi Chanin bar Abaye, the son of Abaye said, Amar Rabbi Pedat, Amar Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Pedat said that Rabbi Yochanan said Echad Shinu Yayin, that whether you change wine, Ve'echad Shinui Makom Eno Tzarich Levarech. If you change wine, meaning you were drinking Manischewitz wine and somebody brings, good wine, fine wine to the table, he says you don't have to say Borei Priya Gefen again. You already said it. Okay? Now, and similarly, Shinui Makom. If you drank wine in one place and you go to another place, you don't have to say the blessing again.
Why?
That's what Rabbi Yochanan says.
So he's too lenient.
He's very lenient. So they raised an objection to him. Shinui Makom tzarich levarech, shinui yayin ein tzarich levarech. It says in a Braita, when you bring a different wine, if you're already drinking wine and you bring another wine, you don't have to say Borei Priya Gefen again. You already said Borei Priya Gefen. There is a halacha that if you bring better wine, you're supposed to say Birkat HaTov v'Hametiv. So for example, you're drinking Manischewitz heavy Malaga and somebody brings champagne. You don't have to say Borei Priya Gefen, but you do have to say Hatov v'Hametiv. Okay, that's a different halacha. Good morning. That's a different halacha. That's not Borei Priya Gefen, that's Hatov v'Hametiv. But insofar as Borei Priya Gefen is concerned, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no requirement, even with a new wine coming to the table, even with Shinoi Makom, he says you don't need to say a new bracha. However, the Braita says Shinoi Makom. If you drank wine at synagogue and you walk home, you want to have more wine. Of course you have to say Borei Priya Gefen again. It's not the same place. Okay? So if you eat an apple in synagogue and you walk home and you eat an apple at home, you don't have to say Borei Priya Etz on a new apple. How could it be? Okay? So that's what the Braita says. Tiyuvta de Rabbi Yochanan. Tiyuvta. You're right. Rabbi Yochanan's out. He's wrong. Tiyuvta. We refute Rabbi Yochanan. He doesn't even put up a fight. It's over.
What's tiyuvta?
Tiyuvta means rejected. We reject him. He made a mistake. Okay, so this Rabbi Yochanan statement is not correct. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha is that if you go from one place to another, you definitely have to say Borei Priya Gefen again. Even according to the lenient position of Rav, that you don't have to say Kiddush again, even though you heard Kiddush in the Beit Knesset and you went home, even according to him, you have to say Borei Priya Gefen at home. Okay, that's definitely the halacha. And that's true for any bracha rishona. If you there's no way, if you say a Borei Priya Etz in this room, and you go downstairs and you see an apple, you have to say Borei Priya Etz again. You can't say, I was having in mind on the Borei Priya Etz upstairs, Shinui Makom, you have to say a new bracha. New bracha. In fact, even if you said Borei Priya Etz, here's the extreme, even if you said Borei Priya Etz here, and you ate the apple, and you carry the same apple downstairs, and you want to eat it, Borei Priya Etz again. Shinui Makom, you need a new bracha. Okay, now, we're on Amud Bet, we're on the second side of Kuf Aleph. Line number 3. Yativ Rav Idi bar Avin kabed Rav Chesda. Rav Idi bar Ravin was sitting in front of Rav Chisda, V'yativ Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda was sitting v'kamar mishmei de Rav Huna, and he said in the name of Rav Huna, Ha de amrat shinui makom tzarich levarech. You said that shinui makom, if you change places, you have to say a blessing again. Lo shanu ela mibayit labayit. That's only true if you go from one building to another building. Aval mimakom lamakom lo. But from one place to another, it's not necessarily true. Okay, so right. Okay, so and that's according to everybody except Rabbi Yochanan, right? Meaning, so if you go from one place to another, meaning within the same building. So you went from upstairs to downstairs, like we said before, or something like that. He says, you don't have to say another bracha. You said gefen upstairs, you come downstairs, you don't have to say gefen again. That's what he's saying. Amar lei Rav Idi bar Avin. Rav Idi bar Avin said, Hachita nenale b'matnita devei Rav Henak v'amrela b'matnita devei bar Henak. That was what was taught in the Tosefta, in the teaching of Rav Henak, the yeshiva of Rav Henak, and some say in the yeshiva of Bar Henak Kivatech, according to you. Ve'ela Rav Huna matnita kamashmalan. But is Rav Huna coming to tell us what's already written in the Tosefta? In other words, you're quoting this in the name of Rav Huna. The Rav Huna said that if you go from place to place, you don't have to say another bracha. Okay, from upstairs to downstairs, you don't have to say another bracha. But that's what it says in the Tosefta. So why does Rav Huna have to tell you this? So is he coming just to tell you something that's already written? Rav Huna matnita lashmi'ale. That Rav Huna hadn't heard the Braita. Okay, that's why he was telling the halacha in his own name. He didn't know that it was written in a Tosefta. He didn't know it had already been written. Okay, yativ Rav Chisda v'kamar mishmei de nafshei. And Rav Chisda sat down and said in his own name, Ha de amrat shinui makom tzarich levarech lo amaran ela bidvarim she'en te'onin bracha lacharehen bimkoman aval dvarim ha'te'onin bracha lacharehen bimkoman en tzarich levarech. That when do you need to say a bracha over again if you change places? That's only something that doesn't require a bracha afterwards. But something that requires the bracha afterwards, you have to have a bracha on it again. Now what does that mean? What it means is, let's say a person eats hamotzi. He says hamotzi. And then he relocates to a new area. Or let's say he leaves the building and he comes back 20 minutes later. Does he have to say hamotzi again? So he says, no, why not? Because it requires bracha achrona bimkoman, in its place. Since he has to come back, he never broke his original bracha. If you eat an apple and you leave and you come back, there's no connection between my eating the apple now and eating the apple before. But if I ate hamotzi and I left before saying Birkat Hamazon and I have to come back to say Birkat Hamazon now, so I never ended my eating of the bread. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Ma'itama, what's the reasoning? Lekiv'a kama adar. He goes back to his original kavi'ut. In other words, he goes back to his initial meal. He didn't break the meal. He was continuing the meal.
So you make bracha achrona.
So since he has to make a bracha achrona, that means he's obligated to return to its original place. So he never ended the meal. We don't say when he walked out of the room, but if you ate an apple and you leave the room and you come back,
No connection.
there's no connection. It's a new eating. If I eat an apple and I put it in the fridge and tomorrow I eat it again, I don't say bracha. How long is it going to go? Right? So here, as long as it's part of a meal, it's part of a meal, it's a different story. According to Rav Sheshet, in both cases you have to say a bracha. Meaning, according to Rav Sheshet, even if you were having bread and you left the room and you came back, you would have to say hamotzi again. It doesn't matter that you need to say bracha achrona. That's not the halacha, but that's what he says. So now the Gemara says, we raise an objection to this. Bnei chavura shayu misubin lishtot. A group of people who were sitting back, drinking. It always says misubin. They were reclining to drink, because that's how they used to drink back then. So they were reclining comfortably, drinking. Ve'akru raglehen, let's say likrat chatan or likrat kala. And all of a sudden they saw a parade. It was the chatan and kala going by. They weren't at the wedding, or maybe they were, but they see them going out, and they say, hey, let's go greet the chatan and kala, let's run out and see the bride and groom. So they leave their meal.
No.
So now they're going to come back, right? So it says, En te'onin bracha lemafreya, kishehen chozrin. I'm sorry. Kishehen yotzin en te'onin bracha lemafreya. They don't have to say a bracha achrona on what they drank already. And when kishen chozrin and tunin bracha lechatchila, when they come back, they don't have to say a bracha again. In other words, they were in the middle of drinking wine, let's say, which requires the blessing of ala gefen val priya gefen afterwards. It has an after bracha, right? So since it has an after bracha that's supposed to be said right there, even though they left the room and they went out to greet the chatan and kala, they have to come back. Because they need to come back to say their rachav ala gefen. So they don't have to say ala gefen before they go out to see the chatan and kala. And when they come back from seeing the chatan and kala, they don't have to say borei priya gefen to start over again. They can continue, in other words, their original drinking. However, what does the Braita say? Ba'med divarim amurim. Under what circumstances is this the case? Only she'eni rosham zaken o choleh. Only if they left there an old person or a sick person. That's just an example. It means they all said, hey, let's go out to greet the bride and groom. But there was an elderly guy who walks, with a cane. He's not going to run out with them to visit the chatan and kala. He says, have a good time, guys. I'm going to wait here for you to come back. Right? Or a person who's sick. He can't go with them. He says, I'm going to sit here. So since they left somebody behind, כשהן יוצאים טעונין ברכה למפרע, כשהן חוזרים טעונין ברכה, אבל לא הניחו שם לא זקן ולא חולה, כשהן יוצאים טעונין ברכה למפרע, כשהן חוזרים טעונין ברכה לכתחילה. So what does that show you? That shows you that there are two conditions, right? First of all, it was a food that they needed to say a bracha afterwards, because it was hagefen. They were drinking wine. So they needed to return. Second of all, what was the second condition? They left somebody at the table. In other words, if we're sitting at a meal and everybody gets up and goes out and then we all come back, is it a continuation of the original meal or are we starting over again? This Braita is saying that if everybody got up to go, then when you come back you're starting over again. If you left one person, then we could say that you're continuing. Okay? So now the Braita seems to be implying that there are two conditions. Number one, that you're returning, you're continuing. And how do we know you're continuing? Because you have a person that you left behind. Number two is that you had to come back because there's a bracha achrona to be said. Okay? So what does the Gemara infer from this? Mi de katani akru raglehen. We're certainly talking about a food that they had to come back to say a bracha achrona on, and v'tamadini chusham zaken ochole who de kishen yotin entunin bracha lemafreya kishen chozin entunin bracha lechatchila aval lo hini chusham zaken ochole kishen yotin entunin bracha lemafreya kishen chozin entunin bracha lechatchila kashya l'Rav Chisda. So that's a big problem, because what did Rav Chisda say? He said there's only one thing you need to be able to go back without starting over again. What's the one thing you need? That you needed to say a bracha achrona. That's all. You don't need to leave anybody behind. That's not required. All you need to have is an obligation to go back. If you have an obligation to go back to say bracha achrona, that's enough. But this Braita is saying, no, two conditions. There has to be at least one person from the original meal still sitting there. Which would mean if you were by yourself and you went out, for sure you'd have to say a bracha again. That's against Rav Chisda. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Man tana akirot. Who is the author of this Braita about getting up from the table? It's Rabbi Yehuda. Titanya, as we learned in the Braita, Chaverim shayim misubin va'akru raglehen leilech al beta knesset, or the beta midrash, kishen yotzin enteonin bracha lemafrei, kishen chozin enteonin bracha lechatchila. That we said, when they get up, they go, let's say a group of friends is drinking or eating, and they get up to go to the Beit Knesset to pray mincha, or arvit, or whatever, or they go to the Beit Midrash to study some Torah or whatever, and they come back, they don't have to say the beginning bracha over again. In other words, they don't have to say the bracha achrona, and they don't have to say the bracha achrona before they leave, and they don't have to say a new bracha when they come back. They don't have to start all over again. They can say it's a continuation. But Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, במה דברים אמורים בזמן שהניחו שם מקצת חברים? אבל לא הניחו שם מקצת חברים, כשהן יוצאים טעונין ברכה למפרע, וכשהן חוזרים טעונין ברכה לכתחילה. Okay, so what does that show you? That is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that you have to leave somebody behind in order to continue the meal. But according to the Tanakama, you don't have to leave somebody behind in order to say you're continuing the meal. And Rav Chisda was following the Tanakama. Rav Chisda said the only requirement is that there's a bracha achrona that needs to be said. As long as there's birkat hamazon or al hagefen that needs to be said, it's enough to say you're continuing. You didn't end yet. You're going back for birkat hamazon. So even if everybody got up according to Rav Chisda, we can come back and continue. Okay, so well, I guess we can go a little bit further. We're kind of going into the next daf, but it's okay. Ella tama de b'dvarim ha'teonin bracha la'achrein b'mkoman כשהן יוצאים אין טעונים ברכה למפרע, כשהן חוזרים אין טעונים ברכה לכתחילה. אבל דברים שאין טעונים ברכה לאחריהן במקומן, אפילו לרבנן כשהן יוצאים טעונים ברכה למפרע, כשהן חוזרים טעונים ברכה לכתחילה. That's where we're going to stop. But that's basically restating Rav Chisda, that according to Rav Chisda, there is a requirement. In other words, if you just read the Braita, it sounds like the Chachamim are saying, if everybody gets up to leave and they go to the Beit Knesset, even if they were eating lettuce, it doesn't matter. They can all come back afterwards and continue. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying if there's one of the main brachot, not Borei Nefashot, we're talking about either Ala Michya or Ala Gefen or Birkat Hamazon. Rav Chisda is adding that to the Braita. In other words, he's saying even the Chachamim who say that everybody can get up and leave and come back, they're only talking about a case where they have to come back because they have to say Ala Michya or Ala Gefen together back at the place where they originally started, or they have to say Birkat Hamazon where they originally started. And what Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing is he's saying that's not enough. They have to leave at least one person behind to show that there's continuity between the previous eating and the current eating. If everybody gets up from the table, when they come back, the previous eating is over and a new eating is starting. And that means that before they get up, they have to say their bracha achrona, because they know that they're ending that meal or that eating, and when they come back, it's going to be a completely new situation. And that's really what the Gemara is dealing with here. How do we define the beginning and end of a meal? Psychologically, we might feel like we got up and we came back and we're continuing the meal. But halachically, when does one unit of eating end and a new one begin? So that's what they're really arguing about here. And it's very interesting because it's very practical. It's very halacha lema'aseh.